Israel has been rocked by its largest protest since the start of the war against Hamas. Trouble and pressure is mounting on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Thousands of people took to the streets of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem in the largest ever protest march, which poses a significant challenge to the increasingly embattled leadership of the Prime Minister. Angry protesters, including families of those taken hostage by Hamas, say that the government is not really serious about rescuing those in Hamas custody. While 105 people were released during a temporary truce last year, another 130 that were kidnapped are either dead or still being held by Hamas and other militant groups. Banners at the protest called on the Prime Minister to resign and for Israel to hold new elections. Desperate family members have urged the government to reach a deal to free dozens of hostages held by Hamas in Gaza and to hold early elections. These protests highlight deep divisions within the people in Israel over its attack on Hamas in retaliation to the terror group's surprise attack out of Gaza, which left Israel stunned and hurt. Nearly 6 months of war have renewed these divisions within the Israeli society. The Hamas militant group had killed some 1,200 people during its cross-border attack on October the 7th and took 250 others hostage. Roughly half the hostages were released during a week-long ceasefire in November. But then repeated attempts by international mediators to broker another ceasefire deal has failed. Interestingly, Netanyahu has been facing pressure to step down even before the war. Months before the attack saw hundreds of thousands of Israelis participate in repeated demonstrations against reforms proposed by Netanyahu's government that critics claim weakened the country's judiciary and eroded its systems of checks and balances. This is perhaps the largest anti-government protest since the war in Gaza. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed to destroy Hamas and bring all the hostages home, but he has failed in his promise to rescue the hostages, which has only added to the tension and anger amongst his people. Meanwhile, an embattled Prime Minister, in a nationally televised speech before undergoing a hernia surgery, said he understood the pain of the hostages' families, saying that he will do everything to bring them back home. However, he fired back at his people, rejecting their demands for an early election. He says calling new elections would paralyze Israel for 6 to 8 months, and that would also paralyze the ongoing hostage talks. Netanyahu has repeated his vow for a military ground offensive in Rafah, the southern Gazan city where more than half of the territory's population of 2.3 million now shelters after fleeing fighting elsewhere. Well, pressure for the Israeli Prime Minister is building from all sides. He is being pulled in opposing directions by his coalition partners, Israeli public opinion, and allies abroad, with the war in Gaza and his political future in the balance. In recent weeks, relatives of hostages have expressed outrage at Netanyahu's handling of the negotiations with Hamas aimed at achieving their early release. The Prime Minister, they say, is so determined to pursue the destruction of Hamas that he just might do it at the expense of the hostages. Netanyahu, meanwhile, in his defense, has said that Hamas is sticking to unrealistic demands and that those who think that he hasn't been doing enough to secure the release of the hostages are completely wrong. Meanwhile, adding to the Israeli Prime Minister's troubles is the latest threat from Iran, which has vowed of giving a quote-unquote harsh response for the recent killing of their top generals. Iran claims Israel has killed one of their senior commanders from their elite Quds force in Syria's capital. This killing is believed to be the highest level assassination of an Iranian military leader since the war in Gaza began. The Israelis appear to be testing the resolve of the Iranians and their allies and signaling that they are serious about increasing pressure on their enemies. The Israelis are also looking at the fact that both Iran and Hezbollah have not been really pushing as hard as some might have expected. Well, now they will see if Iran and Hezbollah will push back. But this latest attack could be seen as a serious escalation, further adding to the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's growing woes.